My name is Tom. I am a doctor now. I help many people, but my story starts far away. Not in the hospital, not in this city, not with books, but under a metal roof in a small village. I was not born rich. I was not born strong. I was not lucky. But I was never alone. My father could not read. He never went to school. But he taught me how to stand again and again. He sold vegetables in the market. He worked every day. He left before sunrise and came home after dark. His hands were rough, his shirt was old, his face was tired, but he never complained once. He smiled when he saw me, even when he was hurt, even when his shoes were wet, even when he had no rest. He never asked for thanks. He never asked for help. He gave without words and loved with his work. I remember my first day at school. I wore torn shoes. I held a notebook with 3 names on it. It was my brother's book, used before me. The cover was ripped. The pages were thin. Kids looked at my shoes. Some laughed at me. Some pointed fingers. Some whispered and stared. I wanted to hide. I wanted to run. But I went home crying, with dust on my socks. My father was sitting outside, eating his bread. He looked at me and said nothing, just waited. I told him about the shoes, about the laughing kids, about the shame I felt, and how I wanted new ones. He looked at my face, wiped my tears slow, and said something I never forgot, not even once. If you walk with your head high, no one looks at your shoes, they only see your eyes. That night I sat alone, thinking of his words. I looked at my feet, then I looked at the sky. I decided to try harder, not to feel small, not to let shame win, not to stop walking. I could not buy new shoes, but I could walk proud. I could study hard. I could dream big, even with old books, even with cold water, even with hunger sometimes. I would not give up. During holidays, I helped my father. I carried baskets. I stood by the cart. I shouted prices. He could not read numbers. He could not write names, but he never gave the wrong change. Some people were kind, others were not. Some laughed at him, called him slow or poor. He heard them all, but stayed quiet always. He looked at the ground and kept working hard. I saw his pain. I saw his shame. I saw his eyes turn red, but he never said a word. I felt something burn inside me, not just sadness, but something strong, something like a promise. I didn't want money. I didn't want fame. I just wanted the world to see him the way I do. He wasn't a fool. He wasn't a failure. He was the smartest man I knew in the hardest way. At school, I read fast. I wrote with care. I studied late with one candle on the table. My clothes smelled of smoke. My bag had holes, but my books were clean, and my mind was full. I never talked back. I never skipped class. I always remembered his hands, his feet, his face. He didn't know how to read, but he gave me every chance, every minute, every dream. And when I passed middle school, he smiled a little more. He bought me sweets, even when money was low. He told the neighbors, My son reads well. Then he went to bed early and woke up again before dawn. He never said, "I'm proud," but he washed my shirt. He fixed my pen and packed my bread. He showed his love in action, in silence, in sacrifice. And I saw it every day without one word. That was my world, that little village, that metal roof, that strong, quiet man. I had nothing more, but it was enough. Because I had a reason. I had a goal. I wanted to read, not just for me, but for him, for all he lost, for all he gave. That's how my story began. Not with books, not with titles, but with a father's hands. On weekends, I did not rest. I went with my father. We walked to the market, with baskets full of hope. The street was loud, the people rushed, the ground was wet, and the sun was high. My father called out prices, lifted heavy bags, smiled to strangers, and worked without pause. I watched him carefully. I counted the coins. I wiped his forehead and stayed close always. Some customers laughed at him. They asked him to read numbers. They asked him to write names. He stayed quiet and nodded, gave the right change, smiled with tired eyes, and said thank you. Later I asked him why he said nothing, why he never replied, why he never looked upset. He said, "I don't need to speak back. I know what I know, and I know who I am." That answer stayed with me. It sat deep inside. It grew with my thoughts and changed how I see. I understood that strength is not loud or proud. It is quiet and steady, like the way he stood. I promised myself then, in that noisy market, that I would learn well, not just for me. I would become someone with knowledge, someone with voice, someone who lifts others. In school, I studied hard. I read every book. I listened to teachers and wrote down everything. My classmates had new bags. They had clean shoes. They had lunches and snacks and soft, warm coats. But I had my reason. I had my goal. I had my father, and I had my fire. That fire kept me going when I felt tired, when I was cold, when I was alone. When exams came close, I stayed up late. I studied in silence. I read with one small lamp. The room was small. The air was cold. The walls were thin. But my dream was strong. My father checked on me, brought tea with sugar, smiled and said little, but looked at me with pride. I never wanted to fail him. I wanted to shine, not for the world, but for his name. Years passed slowly, but I grew fast. I passed every class. I finished high school. My results were good. My name was on the board. The village clapped, and my father smiled wide. One day a letter came. It had a stamp. It said I got a place in a big city school. It was for medicine. A dream I had. A dream I hid. But now it was real. My father looked at the letter. He did not read, but he kissed my head and hugged me tight. He said, "Go learn well." Then went outside, stood for a moment and looked at the sky. I saw tears in his eyes. He never cried before, not when he fell, not when he was sick. But now he cried, not from pain, not from loss, but from something deeper. That night he sat with me. He opened a box. Inside was paper with old family deeds. He said this land is small, but it is ours, and I will sell it to help you start. I said, no, please don't. It is all we have. But he smiled and said, you are all I have. He sold the land, paid my fees, bought my ticket, and gave me his blessing. When I left home, the sky was gray, the road was long, and my heart was heavy. I looked back once, saw my village fade, saw his hand raised and felt the wind cold. In the city I was lost, the streets were loud, the people fast, and everything new. I missed the quiet, I missed his voice, I missed our meals and his warm tea. But I remembered my promise, I remembered the market, I remembered his hands. I studied hard again, I worked late hours, I cleaned rooms and read in buses. Sometimes I cried alone, from stress or pain, but I never stopped. I never gave up, because I had a reason, and that reason walked with me, even when I was far. After 5 hard years, I wore a white coat, I held my first stethoscope, and I wrote my name. I sent a letter home with one word inside, doctor, and a smile drawn below. My father never wrote back, but I knew he smiled. I knew he showed the letter to every neighbor. He didn't need to read to feel my pride, and I didn't need words to feel his heart. The hospital was big, the halls were cold, the lights were bright, and the air smelled clean. I walked with my coat, held my books tight, smiled at strangers, and hid my fear. There were doctors who knew much, spoke fast words, gave sharp orders, and walked with pride. I stayed quiet first, listened a lot, wrote every note, and worked late nights. I saw pain every day, saw children cry, saw mothers fall, saw fathers wait. But I also saw hope in every touch, in every word, and every small smile. I remembered my father, his strong back, his dirty hands, and clean heart. I worked not for money, not for name, but for the child who had no voice. After 2 more years, I finished my training, I passed my tests, and earned my badge. I could now choose a place to stay, a clinic to join, a future to build. But my heart spoke first, and it said one thing: go home now, go where it began. So I packed my things, took a train back, saw old hills, and smelled old dust. When I reached my village, people were waiting. They clapped and cheered and smiled wide. Children ran close, asked questions fast, touched my bag, and called me doctor. My father stood back, silent as always, eyes full of tears, but no words said. I hugged him long. He smelled like earth, like tea and smoke, and warm, hard work. I told him the plan, to open a clinic once every week, for free to all. He nodded slow, then looked around and said, that tree there is a good place. So we cleaned the spot, fixed old chairs, bought some tools, and painted signs. I hung my coat, opened my books, and waited for patients with heart wide open. Old women came first, then young boys, then men with pain and girls with cough. Some came afraid, some came shy, but I welcomed all with soft, calm words. I gave them time, gave them care, gave them hope, and gave them peace. They left with thanks and kind smiles, and my heart felt full and deeply proud. After some weeks, people told others more came walking. Some traveled far. They didn't come for medicine, only they came for kindness. They came for trust. One day a boy came without shoes, with a deep cut and no money. He said, "I'm sorry." I said, "You're safe," then cleaned his wound and gave him food. That night I sat with my father near. We drank hot tea and watched stars. I said, "Do you feel proud?" He smiled a bit and said, "You kept your word." I wanted to cry, but held it in because his eyes already did. He touched my hand, rough and dry, and said, "You changed lives." Months passed fast. I worked hard still, never missed a day, never lost joy. Then one call came from the city asking me to speak at a big event. I was nervous first, but said yes, because the story was not only mine, it was his too. It was ours. It was born in sweat and raised in dreams. At the event I stood. Lights were bright, people were many, and hearts were open. I told them my path from village mud to hospital lights and back again. I said, not all heroes wear coats. Some wear old clothes and carry baskets. I spoke of my father, who taught me truth without a book or single page. People clapped loud. Some cried too. They saw the love behind my words. I ended my talk by calling him, asking him up to stand with me. He walked slow, dressed in old clothes, but stood tall with proud, deep eyes. I held his hand, raised it high, and said, "This is the reason I am here." They gave us flowers, took our photo, asked for quotes, and sent it to news. My father looked down, didn't smile much, but whispered, "Your mother would be proud." I had never heard him speak of her so soft, so warm, like a secret song. I held his hand tighter than ever and promised again to never stop. The days moved fast. The clinic grew. People came more. Stories filled the air. Some brought sweets, some brought bread, some just smiled and left a prayer. One old man came, hands shaking hard, said, "I heard, the doctor listens first." He sat down slow, talked about pain. I checked him gently, then gave him hope. Children I once knew now had kids. They called me uncle. They hugged me tight. The school I went to was still the same, small and noisy, but full of dreams. I visited often, talked to the boys, told them my story, made them believe. One boy said shyly, "I want to help." I said, "You already do, by dreaming big." Every week I saw more faces, new and old, near and far. Some thanked me once, some cried loud, some left silent, but I felt them all. They told others, shared my name, but I told them, share the kindness more. It was never fame I came to find, but the peace of giving back. One evening it rained, the roads were wet, my coat was thin, but I still went. My father watched from our door, said nothing loud, but gave me his scarf. He never asked why, never said stop, but always stood with quiet strength. He fixed the clinic when the wall cracked, painted the bench, and cleaned the steps. People thought he did little, but I knew he did more than anyone else. He watched the world from the side, but held it up with silent care. Sometimes I found him wiping the floor or boiling tea for waiting patients. He never wore white, never gave pills, but gave warmth, like no one else. One day I found him, sitting alone, looking at the sky with deep, still eyes. I sat beside him, said nothing first, then asked, "Do you miss her?" He nodded once, then said low, "Every morning, when the tea boils slow." I didn't know what to say, so I just held his strong old hand. He told me stories I never heard of his young days and his simple dreams. He wanted to write, to read books, to travel far, but life moved fast. He said, "But I got you," smiled a bit, then added, "That's more than I hoped." I looked at him with full eyes and said, "You gave me wings." That night I wrote a new paper about silent fathers who give without asking. I sent it to a journal. They replied fast, said it moved them, and would publish it. It was not medical, not about science, but about love, written with truth. It was the first time I wrote not as doctor, but as son, with heart wide open. One morning came with bad news. I saw his face paler than ever. He said he was fine, but I knew. His body was tired, his walk was slow. I begged him to rest. He just smiled, said, "Don't forget, your patients wait." But that day I closed the clinic and stayed home, just to sit by him. We drank tea slow, talked of rain, he told me again, about my first step. How I fell once, cried so loud but stood again with dusty knees. He said that's life, not about falling, but always rising one more time. I wrote those words on clinic walls so others read and stayed strong. After some weeks, he stayed in bed, looked at the roof, and said her name. He didn't want hospitals, said, "My time's near, but my heart is full." I sat by him every day, read him books and told him jokes. He laughed soft, touched my face, said, "You made it," then closed his eyes. The house was quiet, the chair was still, the scarf was folded, tea was cold. I buried him close near our tree, where the birds sang and sun touched soft. People came from far, brought flowers, told stories, cried like family. I stood in silence, held his photo, and promised again to never forget. Now I walk slow down the same road, his steps in mine, his voice behind. Every child I help, I see his face, in their eyes, in their laugh. I teach young doctors, not just pills, but how to see the full human. I tell them always, read the heart before the chart and listen deep. My clinic still stands, stronger than ever, painted fresh and full of hope. People still come, stories still grow, and his scarf still hangs near the door. It reminds me daily of who I am, where I came from, and why I care. And when the sun sets, I light a candle and whisper, "Thank you, Baba." Years passed slowly, seasons changed. but his voice stayed inside my mind. Each morning I rise, I hear him speak, not with words, but with his love. He walks with me in quiet ways, through every room, through every street. Some see just me, but I know well I carry two, not one alone. The clinic kept growing. The walls told stories. The halls breathed hope, not pain. A boy once came with broken shoes. His face was tired, but his eyes were fire. He reminded me of myself long ago, standing small with heavy dreams. I gave him books. I gave him time. I gave him faith, like my father did. One girl came. Her voice was soft. She wanted to quit, to stop her school. I sat her down, told her calm, "You are more than what they say." She smiled a little, wiped her tears, and left the room with her head high. That night I cried, not from pain, but from pride, because I helped. I started writing short letters each day to my younger self to stay strong. I wrote about fear, about shame, about how light finds its way through. I shared those notes with students lost, with people tired, and they replied. They said, "We needed this." And I said, "I needed it too, long ago." One day I was asked to speak in a school to young kids from poor homes. I stood before them, held my scarf, and told my truth from start to end. I said, "Being poor is not a shame, but forgetting kindness always is." They clapped hard, some cried too, and I saw hope in every eye. Later I sat in my small room, looked at old photos, touched the frame. There was his face, silent and still, his eyes warm, his hands strong. I whispered low, "You're still here," and smiled wide like a little boy, because I knew he never left. He just lives in what I do. The city changed. Lights grew bright, but I stayed close to where I began. I visit schools. I build libraries. I open doors that were once shut. I tell the tale of a man unknown who gave his life for his son's path. Some cry hearing it, some just nod, but all agree he was the hero. One evening came with soft rain. I walked slow under the same tree. Birds still sang, wind was cool, and I stood quiet near his grave. I said my thanks not with tears, but with stories I told him proud. "I did it, Baba," I said slow, "and I am still doing it for you." That week, I got a special call from the country's head. With kind words, they told me my name had been chosen for an honor, for service done with heart and hand. I smiled a bit, but my thoughts went straight to him, and I wondered what he would say in his simple way. Maybe just good, with that soft nod of his that always meant more than words, more than noise. The big day came. The lights were strong. Cameras flashed. People stood tall. I walked the stage in my white coat, my heart beating fast, hands holding tight. I held his photo against my chest, then raised my hand to stop the speech. "I can't take this alone today," I said loudly, and the room went still. I spoke from the place where the boy inside me still lived, the one with broken shoes, tired books, and empty lunches. But I had a man beside me who gave his all, a man with dirty hands and a golden heart. He couldn't read, he couldn't write, but he wrote me with his soul. I learned to read, yes, but he taught me why to read and what it truly means. So I said to the crowd, I hold this prize with all my pride, but it belongs to someone else. It belongs to him, the one who never asked, but always gave more than he had. The crowd rose with full eyes. The silence was deep. Then came the cheers. I stepped down slowly, photo in hand, and I felt him near, like always before. That night back home I made some tea, opened my book and wrote again. I wrote these words. Not all kings wear a crown or speak out loud. Some wear dust, some wear scars, but they build forever homes. My father was that, the king I knew, who ruled by love and silent truth. Now every year on that same date I visit the tree and clean the grave. I sit for a while, drink our tea, and tell him the news like I always did. He stays quiet, but I feel him, in the wind, in the leaves. And I always end with the same words. Your name lives on through every hand I heal, because I write it on every heart, with every act and every smile. I speak it in every class, with every story and every truth. I carry it like my breath, like my blood, like my roots. Because his name is not just a name, but my light, my compass, my home.